not unexpectedly, there were a wide range of different autistic experiences reported by the students in this study. And that's just very consistent with the diverse nature of autism, and it is, after all, called a spectrum. But most of the students reported that in their perspective, they believed that their experiences, both positive and negative, seemed to be magnified as compared to their non-autistic peers. So that's the perspective of the autistic students. It certainly is consistent with a lot of literature indicating that autistic individuals experience a high level of anxiety than non-autistic people. But in terms of this study, we are looking only at the understandings or the perspectives of the autistic students, and indeed they believe that to be true. But they did also add that they had both positive and negative experiences. Some of these were similar to some of the experiences that later reports on non-autistic students have recently been suggesting, like loneliness and anxiety. But in fact, our study does not address that question because we did not ask questions of non-autistic students, only of autistic students. But quite interestingly, our study showed data that indicated important distinctions between undergraduate students and graduate students in terms of how they felt about the lockdown and about online learning. So it turned out that undergraduate students were much happier to be learning online and much happier to be at home and away from campus, away from large classes, away from sensory experiences which are difficult for them, whereas graduate students who usually are attending campus and attending classes that are much smaller in size with more likely familiar peers and definitely familiar professors, they did not enjoy the online experience nearly as much, and in fact they wished to get back on campus as soon as possible. But they had the advantage of the familiarity of people, places, and knowing the schedules and the way things happen on campus, which was not always the case, especially with first and second year autistic students. Consistent with what I've already said, the most positive experiences seemed to be experienced by undergraduate students. So for them, not having to deal with the large classes and the other negative sensory input, whether it be crowds, noise, fluorescent lights, heat, or any other kind of sensory situation. And in addition, not having to what is sometimes called camouflage, that is to act as if they're not autistic in order to make non-autistic people comfortable. Not having that pressure on them to do that day after day after day was a huge relief to them. And indeed, their experiences of being on campus are often utterly exhausting and full of anxiety and require them to have periods of recovery when they do get home away from the campus. So, especially at the very beginning, the undergraduate students expressed extreme reductions in their anxiety. They were so relieved to get off campus, and even though it was a new challenge to learn online, they didn't have to deal with these negative experiences that they were trying to cope with when they were learning in the classroom. But the success of undergraduate students and also students, but of the autistic students who were learning online, their success really depended on their organizational abilities, their executive functioning abilities. So their ability to set goals, to manage their time, to manage their workload, to pay attention, all of these things were very important skills in order for them to be successful online. So that, I believe, would probably, again, this wasn't addressed in our study, be the case with many other students who might have executive functioning problems, that online learning is not that easy for them. But that definitely was something that was reported by the autistic undergraduate students in particular, but we also did have some graduate students who were not successful because of their problems with attentional skills and goal setting and organization. Another positive aspect to the students' experiences was that by being online, it was much easier for professors to put subtitles or closed captioning on their presentations, particularly if they were using PowerPoint. And there have been some really important technological advances over the last almost year now during the pandemic crisis, and these have enhanced the learning experiences for some students, and indeed have made the design of the pedagogical approaches to be more universal, so that information is presented in more than one mode, so and multiple modes whenever possible. So they could read the information as well as listen to the information when there was closed captioning or subtitles. That as students reported about being on lockdown and also learning online, certainly they experienced anxiety associated with all the changes that happened in their lives. Again, we have lots of data from other pandemic research that suggests that all people experience this kind of anxiety. But again, what we believe is, and the literature supports, in addition to the reports by the autistic students in this study, that their anxiety is likely magnified compared to non-autistic students. Interestingly enough, too, was loneliness. Again, this is not something that's unique to the autistic community, but many students reported that although they felt extreme relief at the beginning when they no longer had to go on campus and had to endure the sensory experiences and the loud and large classes, but that over time, as the pandemic went on, they became lonely. And even though many autistic students report that they have friends, a lot of friends online, and very often friends from all over the world, nevertheless, they also value their in-person interactions with friends and familiar people and family. And as time went on, they did express that they were becoming lonely. They also expressed that working online meant that in order to make contact with their professors and in order to, or their teaching assistants or even other peers, they were more dependent on email. And we have found that many autistic university students have expressed a lot of anxiety associated with email. Sometimes they can't articulate why they feel so anxious. Some have given examples that they avoid checking their email, and then they find out that they've missed deadlines or that they're suffering some consequence for something that they should have done. But because email is so anxiety-inducing for them, they hadn't checked it. So that was not a positive aspect, was having to rely more on email. And the graduate students, as I said, were more likely to say that they really missed the in-person interactions with peers who are likely more familiar to them in smaller classes, seminar-type classes at the graduate level. And also at the graduate level, they felt that they were trying to deal with more complex information and information that required higher cognitive loads. And they would have preferred to be able to interact in person with their professors, their peers, and be in smaller classes, which is part of graduate school itself. So definitely, I would say to everybody on campus, and particularly professors or instructors, to learn more about autism and the experiences of what it's like to be an autistic student on campus. And I think very few people realize just how aversive this experience is for a lot of students, and just how much fatigue and anxiety and even loss of identity by having to act in ways that are not really you, because as one student actually said, it would be too weird for me to just act like I'm me. So I found that quite sad, and I think that people who have autistic students in their classes, either as professors or peers or mentors or teaching assistants, should come to understand the experiences before we even start the learning process of how taxing it is to be on campus. Clearly, the subtitles and closed captioning is very important and should be used whenever possible, and is likely to make the learning experience more accessible to not only autistic students, but many other groups of students, such as those with auditory processing challenges, deafness, and also students for whom English isn't their first language, or who are learning in a language other than their first language. And also this relationship between the professor or the teaching assistant and the students, this one-to-one relationship is very important to the students. Some students are very shy and don't advocate for themselves, and so it would be really useful if teaching assistants and professors did reach out to check on students who they thought might be autistic, and just make themselves very approachable, very accessible to the students. But at the same time, I would also encourage students to learn how to advocate very well for themselves, to be able to reach out to their professors, to their teaching assistants, and ask for supports, and also to the student support services that are available on many campuses. You know, probably the one that extends the widest is that change can happen very quickly if there is a will. It was amazing how much change happened in such a short amount of time after the pandemic was announced. The use of closed captioning is a prime example that many people are learning to use it. Technology has improved. Zoom, all kinds of conferencing systems have improved their platforms so that they're accessible for more people and that they're more usable for everyone. But it would be important for all of these kinds of platforms also to address the needs of minority students, such as autistic students or other learning disabled students, or students who are learning in a language other than their first language. Also, this lack of real understanding of the experience of autistic students on campuses can really lead to unrealistic expectations for the students in terms of deadlines for projects, and needing to be projects to be handed in exactly at certain times. So flexibility among understanding professors and teaching assistants is really important to help these students flourish. That's not to say that they shouldn't be demonstrating their knowledge just as any student would, but sometimes autistic students can give excellent verbal presentations and answer questions verbally, but struggle more with their writing. Sometimes it's the other way around, but finding the best channel that this student can demonstrate their knowledge requires flexibility on the part of the university in allowing professors and other people who are engaging with autistic students to help them have the flexibility to accept different ways of demonstrating knowledge. I guess I would like to end by saying diversity is wonderful, and neurodiversity is a source of such richness and is such a valuable thing, especially at a university where we are trying to engage in new ways of making meaning and new ways of creating knowledge. We need to move beyond the medical kind of deficit model of disability and autism that suggests that people who are disabled or autistic people should be more like non-autistic people. In fact, we should find ways to communicate more effectively both ways, with autistic people trying to communicate, yes, effectively with non-autistic people, but also non-autistic people playing their part as well, so that we can actually effectively share our ways of thinking and our ways of being and our different perspectives, so that we can create knowledge together. And it's only by having this kind of attitude and this kind of flexibility that we can all benefit from this great variety of ways of being and thinking and communicating and creating knowledge.